Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I don't have anything off the top. Matt, if you want to kick us
You
off.
don't want to recap the secretary's
Well, you all,
comments about World Press Freedom
I know
Day
you
this
all,
morning?
you all tuned in very closely,
Yes,
and
we
we'll
did.
echo what the secretary said as well. We strongly believe the importance of a free press. It's we believe a bedrock of democracy. It's why one of the many reasons why we travel with all of you. We do this daily press briefing. I think engagement with the media is critically important for both of us to do our jobs.
Okay.
But Matt,
So then, can I ask you, as was raised, perhaps a bit abruptly at the very beginning of his comments this morning, whether or not the State Department regards Julian Assange as a journalist who would be covered by the ideas embodied in World Press Freedom Day.
Matt,
I'm not asking for the DOJ point of view. I'm asking for what the State Department thinks.
the State Department thinks that Mr. Assange has been charged with serious criminal conduct in the United States in connection with his alleged role in one of the largest compromises of classified information in our nation's history. His actions risked serious harm to U.S. national security, to the benefit of our adversaries. It put named human sources to grave and imminent risk and risk of serious physical harm and arbitrary detention. So it does not matter how we categorize any person, but this is we view this as as something he's been charged with serious criminal conduct.
Well, but it does matter, actually, and that's my question. Do you believe that he's a journalist or not?
Matt, I'm just not going to offer a prescriptive assessment from here. Our view on Mr. Assange, our view on Mr. Assange is that he's been charged with serious criminal
Yeah,
conduct
but
in the
anyone
United
can be
States.
charged with anything. You know, Evan Gershkovich has been charged with a serious criminal offense in Russia, and you say that he's a journalist, and he is, obviously, and I just want to know whether or not you, the State Department, regardless of any charges that he faces, believe that he is a journalist or he is something else.
Well, first, I would say, Matt, that these two cases are very,
Of
very
course,
different.
they're completely different, but
The United States doesn't go around arbitrarily detaining people, and the judicial oversight and checks and balances that we have in our system versus the Russian system are a little bit different. But again, I'm not here to offer a specific assessment. What I will say is that he's been charged with a serious crime, with serious criminal conduct in the United States that has seriously put in harm's way U.S. national security, and that continues to be the case.
Okay, so basically the bottom line is that you don't have an answer. You won't say whether you think
I
he
think
is a journalist or not.
I've sufficiently answered your question, Matt. As I've said, we believe that he has been charged with serious
The
criminal
question for
conduct
yourself,
in the United
but
States.
but not for me. Okay, all right, thank you.
All right. Anything else? Go ahead, Saeed.
On Freedom Press Day, I mean, it's been almost a year since Shireen Abu Akleh was killed by the Israeli army. And yesterday, apparently, a call by Senator Chris Van Hollen onto you guys that there was a new report by the security coordinator that was sent to Secretary Blinken. First of all, can you share any information about that with us, if there is any? And is there anything new in this report? Or is there any reason why it should not be released?
Saeed, let me say a couple of things. First, you've heard us say this before. We condemn the tragic killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, and our hearts remain with her family. As you know, Secretary Blinken has had the opportunity to speak to her family before and continue to extend our personal sympathies to them. As you all know, Shireen was not only a U.S. citizen, but a reporter who had earned the respect of audiences around the world, including many, almost all, I assume, in this room. As it relates to this reporting, Saeed, I've seen it. I don't have any additional assessment to offer. I've not seen this report. My understanding is that the U.S. Security Coordinator has not changed the same conclusion that was released last summer, that we released when we put out a statement about this, which is that IDF gunfire was likely the reason, unintentionally. But again, I don't have any additional updates or assessments to offer on this
Was
report.
ever held accountable, and I don't believe that, do you expect anyone to be held accountable?
Saeed, we as we noted in our statement about this last summer, was that our findings that are consistent with the U.S. security coordinators is that this was unintentional and due to incredibly tragic circumstances. And so what we continue to raise with our Israeli partners and with others around the world is ensuring what we can do to take appropriate steps to ensure that when it comes to rules of engagement, that civilians, reporters, members of the media just trying to do their job are not placed in harm's way.
Just for the record, today, as we speak, there are 16 Palestinian journalists that are in prison without any charges. Do you call on the Israelis to let them go so they can go about doing their jobs?
Saeed, we have been very clear about the need for journalists to not be arbitrarily detained and to be able to do their job. I'm not aware of these specific cases or reports, but we have been clear and consistent about this. Myra.
Just on that, based on the answer that you're giving to Saeed, you're saying this wasn't intentional, our investigation found, and you're saying we're engaging with our Israeli partners about rules of engagement. That all almost sounds like you're saying you're sorry for what happened to Shireen, but you're moving on and you're engaging with Israeli partners so that this wouldn't happen again. I had not heard anything about U.S. pursuing accountability for her. Can you tell me if I'm wrong, or can you elaborate?
Myra, we have been very clear and consistent about first condemning the tragic killing of Shireen, but also when both the U.S.'s report as well as the IDF's report last summer went public, we have spoken consistently about the need and the call for accountability in this case, and we continue to do so. However, as is consistent from the IDF's finding as well as the finding of the U.S. security coordinator, is that this was not intentional. It was a tragic, due to very tragic circumstances. So yes, we continue to seek accountability for Shireen.
So
Let me
how-
finish.
how-
And that is one of the ways in which we are doing so, in ensuring that when it comes to rules of engagement, we're working on those issues in concert and in partnership with our Israeli counterparts to ensure that civilians and journalists and members of the media are not put in harm's way. These are all things that we have said before consistently.
Yes, these are things you've said before, so I'm wondering if you're doing anything actively to seek accountability from the Israeli side for Shireen's killing. Like, not for rules of engagement sounds like it's something to deter and prevent this happening again. But, I mean, are you able to say, is there an active effort of U.S. seeking accountability from Israel on her case?
There is an active effort, and
what
since
is that?
Shireen's tragic death, we have continued to press Israel to closely review its policies and practices on rules of engagement and consider additional steps to mitigate risk of civilian harm and protect journalists. The Department of Defense, in the immediate following of, not immediate, but in the months following Shireen's death, underscored the need to improve its own assessments and practices to ensure civilian harm mitigation. So this is something that we continue to pursue and push directly with our counterparts in Israel, but also in other parts of the world where journalists often are found in harm's way.
got a couple of things on China, but I'll let others too.
Okay. Alex, go ahead.
Thanks, man. One more question on the press freedom. In light of the Press Freedom Day, did the embassy in Moscow today attempt to meet with Evan in jail?
Alex, we have continuously, since Evan's detention, called for the Russian Federation to offer consistent consular access, consistent and regular consular access that is in line with the Russian Federation's consular convention with us, and that continues to be the case, and we'll continue to raise that directly.
Including today, have you guys reached out to Russian
I
officials?
don't have a specific, I'm not going to offer a specific engagement, but consular access continues to be one of the things we continue to push for, not just in Evan's case, but also the case for Paul Whelan. We continue to call for both of them to be released, and that continues to be our operating procedure on this.
Is the U.S. government thinking about some legal action against Russian foreign ministry for rejecting their rights?
Alex, we continue to have a number of tools at our disposal to hold the Russian Federation accountable. As you saw us last week take action in designating the FSB and the IRGC-IO in relation to their arbitrary and wrongful detention of American citizens. So specifically, through the auspices of the Levinson Act and through the executive order that President Biden signed, we continue to have tools at our disposal, but I'm not going to speculate or preview potential actions from here.
We'll move to
Camilla,
South
I'm
Caucasus.
gonna work the room a little, Alex. I got a couple.
Can we come back to them later?
Sure.
Excellent.
Camilla, go ahead.
Press Freedom Day. I know you mentioned Austin Tice yesterday. Wall Street Journal is reporting that there are U.S. negotiators who've been in touch with Syrian government officials and couched this as a renewed effort to engage with Syrian officials on trying to secure his release. Do you have anything further to add from what you said yesterday?
I'm certainly not going to get into the specifics, Camilla, but I will reiterate what you heard President Biden speak and talk about pretty clearly on Saturday night, which is that we are engaging extensively to try and get Austin home. Because of Austin's work as a journalist and his immense efforts to uncover and show the world the truth of what war can look like, he has been locked up in Syria for more than 11 years now. We have pursued every channel we can to seek his safe return to his family, and will continue to do so. And that includes discussing the case with a number of countries in the region, and we will continue working this until we're able to get his safe return to the United States. Nick, go ahead.
Anything more on the reported drone strike on the Kremlin? The secretary said anything coming out of the Kremlin should be taken with a shaker of salt. I was wondering if you had any more fidelity on what did or didn't happen.
Well, I would echo what Secretary Blinken said this morning. We are aware of these reports, but unable to confirm the authenticity of this. But also, as the Secretary said, I would take anything coming from the Kremlin and the Russian Federation with a shaker of salt. But throughout this, it's important to remember a couple things, Nick. First, Russia invaded Ukraine. It did so unprovoked. They started this war, and they could end it today if they pulled their troops out. Number two, Russia continues to fire missiles and drones at Ukraine every week. And they have done so and targeted scores of Ukrainians, including children, and they have been targeted places like hospitals, apartment buildings, and we have been very clear that we're going to continue to support Ukraine as it defends itself from Russia's invasion on this. Kylie, go ahead.
Just to follow up on that specifically, you said that the U.S. has been unable to confirm the authenticity of these reports. Do you believe that the U.S. will be in a position over the course of the coming days to say what the U.S. believes happened here?
I'm just not going to speculate or get ahead of the process here, Kylie. What I will say, though, is that we're continuing to assess this and confirm the authenticity, and when we have more to update, or if we're in a place to, we shall.
And then we heard from President Zelensky this morning in response to this alleged attack saying, "We don't attack Putin or Moscow." How significantly should we weigh President Putin's denial that Ukraine was involved here?
You mean President Zelensky's?
President Zelensky, sorry.
That is for President Zelensky and the Ukrainians to speak to. I will let them speak to their own battlefield assessments and decisions. That's not something that we have ever spoken to from here.
And then just a final question.
Sure.
From the White House podium earlier, like a few minutes ago, we heard the press secretary talk about the U.S. not providing capabilities for the Ukrainians to strike inside Ukraine or encouraging the Ukrainians to strike inside Ukraine. So going forward, if there are further Ukrainian strikes inside of Russia, should we expect that that could somehow impact continued U.S. support for Ukraine?
What I will say, Kylie, is that we have been pretty clear and consistent throughout this that we'll continue to support our Ukrainian partners for as long as it takes. In fact, we as recently as last week announced another presidential drawdown, and we will continue to do so. But that being said, I think it's also really important to take a step back. I don't want to speculate about the authenticity of this, but we also have been clear and consistent, as you said, that about not encouraging or enabling the Ukrainians to strike beyond its borders. Gita.
Afghanistan, Badant, do you have a readout from the Doha conference?
So, as you know, Gita, the UN convened this meeting in Doha for key international stakeholders to reinvigorate international engagements around common objectives within Afghanistan and how to best support the Afghan people. The US and other stakeholders continue to be deeply concerned about the deteriorating human rights conditions in Afghanistan, especially as it relates to women and girls. And the UN Security Council unanimously adopted last week a resolution that sends a clear signal that the international community is united in condemning the Taliban for its egregious repression of Afghan women and girls.
So any decisions on how to go forward to bring the Taliban in line? And
Well, the envoys representing their various capitals discussed a variety of shared concerns, specifically the presence of terrorist organizations, the lack of inclusivity, which importantly includes human rights, the sheer concern that when more than 50% of Afghanistan's population is being left out of participating in the economy, left out of participating in education, that it is tough to see a credible path forward for the country. So this is something that, of course, this department and key leaders within this department are going to continue to remain deeply engaged on. Raquel, welcome to the briefing room, by the way.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here, Vedan. So the federal police in Brazil raided this morning former President Bolsonaro's home. They are investigating if Bolsonaro used fake vaccination card to travel to the United States. So can you tell us if the former president had to present any kind of vaccination proof in the US while he was not on an official visit?
What I will say, Raquel, is that visa records are confidential, so I'm just not going to get into discussing specific cases. What I can say is that at that time in history, there was a requirement of being vaccinated to enter the United States, in addition to whatever appropriate paperwork and documentation is needed to enter the United States, but I won't say anything more than that, and of course the CDC can speak to you about the various cadences of vaccination requirements that have existed in relation to entering the country.
Can you say if the American authorities will work or are helping the Brazilian police in this investigation, and if there is any concern that Bolsonaro committed a crime here if he was not vaccinated and showing around when he was here for 90 days his fake vaccination card?
I'm just not going to speculate or get into the specifics of an investigation that's ongoing in another country, and I don't have anything additional to
Did the
add on that.
Brazilians ask for help in those investigations?
Again, not that I'm aware of or anything that I can speak to from here, but if we have anything additional to offer, we'll let you know. Leon, go ahead.
I would have pursued that, but I don't think you'll advance this very much. I want to speak about Haiti. The
UN rights chief today, Volker Turk, said Haiti is basically dangling over an abyss. The Secretary General also recently had comments basically saying Haiti is going to pieces. As you know, been talk about potential force or doing things, but we haven't seen really any movement whatsoever since last fall. What are you specifically doing now, and with whom, to potentially do something about the situation in Haiti?
Leon, we remain deeply concerned about the spiraling violence and its impact in all aspects of life in Port-au-Prince. We have made it clear that we believe the security and humanitarian situation in Haiti is worsening, and the conditions on the ground will not improve without armed security assistance from international partners. And any decision about a security force would be done in consultation with the United Nations and the Haitian government. And those discussions continue to be ongoing. And we remain in coordination with partners on next steps on the force and other actions to address the security situation in Haiti, including the needs to support the Haitian National Police. I'll also remind you, Leon, that when we have not hesitated to take action to not just support the Haitian National Police, but also support the Haitian people. Since July of 2021, our INL Bureau has allocated $92 million to support security in Haiti. As of April 2023, INL has donated 40 patrol vehicles to the Haitian National Police, and we've delivered approximately 1,000 sets of protective equipment, 36,000 MREs, and you'll recall, Leon, last fall, in close coordination with our Canadian partners, we facilitated the delivery of vital security-related equipment to Port-au-Prince. So this is something that we've continued to engage on directly, and it's something we continue to work towards in coordination through multilateral auspices as well.
Okay, I understand that, but as you said, these excuse me?
You're good. Someone was standing. Please continue.
These negotiations, you said the discussions are ongoing. So with whom exactly, and what is the sticking point? Because, or several sticking points, because these conversations have been ongoing since at least last fall, last October, I recall, with the sense of urgency at the time. And now we're 8 months later.
Leon, I'm not going to get into the specifics of diplomatic negotiations and engagements, but these engagements continue to be ongoing. We have continued to do so through the UN. We have done so with partners in Haiti. You saw both President Biden and Secretary Blinken speak about this during their travels to Canada recently as well. So we continue to engage with this through appropriate allies and partners, through appropriate multilateral mechanisms, and that continues to be the case.
I understand that very well, but since there hasn't been any real progress, what are the sticking points? What are the issues?
Again, Leon, I'm just not going to get into what our specific engagement. We have never read out specific diplomatic engagements from here as it relates to very sensitive conversations that we're having with partners in Haiti, partners in this specific case, partners in Haiti, partners through the UN, and other allies and partners as well. That's just not something I'm going to start doing from here. Michelle.
Yeah, on Syria,
Sure.
Do you have any comments on the Iranian president visit to Damascus today?
What I would say is that the Iranian regime and the Assad regime continuing to deepen their ties should be of great concern to not just our allies and partners and countries in the region, but also the world broadly. These are two regimes that have continued to partake in malign, destabilizing activities, not just in their immediate countries, but also in the region broadly. we continue to believe, Michelle, that we will not normalize relations with the Assad regime, and we do not support others normalizing with Damascus either. And we've made this abundantly clear to our partners. The U.S. believes that a political solution that is outlined in UN Security Council Resolution 2254 is the only viable solution to this conflict in Syria.
And was that your reaction to the statement made by Arab countries regarding a peaceful solution in Syria?
We have conveyed our concerns about the May 1 meeting in Jordan to Jordan and others. And although we don't agree with that the Assad regime merited this kind of statement, we note that Jordan and others have incorporated some of the United States' key priorities in this process. But I will reiterate again, we don't support normalization with Damascus, and we do not support others normalizing this as well.
Could I just, a Syria refugee question. It's been reported that Syrians in Lebanon have gone into hiding because of an anti-refugee campaign. Now Lebanon has to endure a great deal of the refugee issues, and it has its own problems to contend with. So do you feel that maybe the time has come for the refugees to begin going home? I mean, would you facilitate with Syrian refugees going back to their villages and towns and so on? The government, the Syrian government, said that the refugees are welcome to come back.
Saeed, we are still looking into these specific reports, but what I will note is that all refugees and all displaced persons should be treated humanely, and anyone detained should be afforded all applicable legal protections. And any refugee returns to Syria should be voluntary, they should be safe, they should be dignified. The conditions in Syria today do not allow for such returns, and we have been very clear about this with our foreign partners, including our partners in Lebanon.
Sorry, can I say, 2254,
Yeah.
what year was that passed?
I will have to double check the exact year.
I'll tell you,
Matt.
it was 2015.
That's what I
which
was
is
gonna.
Like, what,
Yes.
8 years ago? That's not good. Okay.
Is there a question?
Yeah, well, my question was, what year was it passed?
2015. Is there a question beyond that?
Nope.
Nope. All right.
Nope.
Again, always here for the Matt Lee history lessons. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vedant. On Press Freedom Day, as you know, Bangladesh is struggling for freedom of expression, as British media Guardian reported yesterday. Media in fear, PM's people enemy attacks. And the government today, the senior minister, they told, as UN, United Nations and all rights group urging for revoking the DSA, Digital Security Act, and they are not willing to revoking this draconian act. So what is your comment about the press freedom situation in Bangladesh? Bangladesh is in the last position in the South Asia.
So we have spoken a great deal previously about our concerns with this legislation. I don't have any new assessment to offer and would refer you to our previous comments on this. Go ahead in the back. Yeah, you.
Thank you. So Deputy Secretary Sharma will lead Japanese Association of Family of Victims kidnapped by DPRK in this afternoon. And what do you think the family is still active and they are still visiting the United States for the first time in 4 years?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of your question. If you could speak up.
The Sharma, Deputy Secretary Sharma, she is going to meet Japanese Association of Families of Victims kidnapped by DPRK this afternoon.
Understood. So I don't have any specific readout to offer on this meeting, as it's my understanding is that it's not taken place yet. But what I will note is that the entirety of this department, including Deputy Secretary Sherman, continue to be deeply concerned about the human rights atrocities and violations that the DPRK partakes in, including the arbitrary detention and kidnapping of citizens. And so this is something that we'll continue to work in close concert with our allies and partners with, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, continue to work closely with the Republic of Korea and Japan itself. Deputy Secretary Sherman had the opportunity to engage with her counterparts from those two countries just a number of months ago, and so it's something that she will bring important perspective to.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
The seizure of a second oil tanker in a week on Wednesday in the Gulf waters by Iran. Any comment on that?
So this was reported earlier this morning, and the Department of Defense reported this as well, that the IRGC Navy seized a Panama flagged oil tanker, the Niobe, while it was transiting the Strait of Hormuz. This is the second time in the past week that Iran has seized a foreign flagged oil tanker while it transits international waters. This seizure follows Iran's seizure of the Advantage Suite, flagged in the Marshall Islands, and candidly, Iran's harassment of vessels and interference with navigational rights in regional and international waters are contrary to international law and disruptive to regional stability and security. We join the international community in calling the Iranian government and the Iranian Navy to immediately release the ship and its crew. Go ahead, Hib. Yeah.
The first tanker was heading to the U.S. and we saw many attacks against U.S. troops. Vadan, do you think that the U.S. response to what Iran is doing in the region is equivalent to what they are doing? I mean, is it efficient?
Well, let me say a couple of things. We continue to have a number of tools at our disposal to hold the Iranian regime accountable. And as recently as last week, we have not hesitated to use those tools, and we will continue to take action. When it comes to holding the malign Iranian regime accountable, we'll continue to take steps to do whatever we can to protect the security of our allies and partners in the region, protect the security of the United States and its service members, and we continue to have a number of tools at our disposal. Go ahead in the back.
Thank you. Two questions. One about Armenian-Azerbaijani dialogue happening these days in Washington.
Sure.
Or in Arlington, Virginia, actually. Do you have any more updates on this? And the second quick question about Turkey shutting down its airspace for Armenian airplanes. This creates major issues for Armenia's economy and freedom of movement because Armenia is already a landlocked country. It suffers double blockade actually from Turkey and Azerbaijan. So airspace is very important.
Okay, let me take your first question first. I don't have any additional updates to offer on the engagements happening between Armenia and Azerbaijan at the Foreign Services Institute. What I will reiterate again is that we remain committed to promoting a peaceful future for the South Caucasus region. We believe that direct dialogue is key to reaching a lasting peace, and we believe that that is possible between these two countries. As I said, Secretary Blinken had the opportunity to join the opening plenary session as well as welcome the foreign ministers for a dinner the evening before. Senior advisor for Caucasus negotiations, Lubano, continues to be deeply engaged on this process, but I don't want to get ahead of the process as it's ongoing. On your second question, the U.S. strongly supports Armenia-Turkey normalization, which we believe would be important for not just these two countries, but helpful for stability across the region. We note with disappointment Turkey's announcement that it would suspend Armenian airline overflight permissions. The agreement that had previously been reached between these two countries to resume air connections had been a very important confidence-building measure, not just between these two countries, but again for regional stability broadly. And it's our sincere hope that Turkey and Armenia can continue to rebuild economic ties and open transportation links as well. Kylie, go ahead.
About something that Ambassador Burns said yesterday on China. He said, we are ready to talk with China pretty clearly, but then he also went on to say that he's told his counterparts that Blinken will visit China when conditions are appropriate. So I'm just a little confused. Is the U.S. ready to talk with China now, or do things need to change for conditions to be appropriate? And what are those conditions that need to change?
So I'm not going to be prescriptive about these said conditions. This is something that the Secretary has spoken about quite clearly in the immediate aftermath of his trip getting rescheduled. We continue to believe that we want this trip to get rescheduled when conditions allow, and that continues to be the case. And we do have open lines of communication with the PRC, and we continue to engage on those. As you all are quite familiar, the Secretary had the opportunity to have a direct engagement with one of his counterparts on the margins of the Munich Security Conference, and we continue to engage, Munich Security Conference, I apologize, and we continue to engage appropriately with the PRC. The important thing to remember is that this is a relationship that the international community expects us to manage responsibly. There are a number of issues between the bilateral relationship of the United States and the PRC that are of immense importance to the entire world, whether that be addressing the challenges of the climate crisis, whether that be economic issues as the sheer amount of trade volume that flows between the Taiwan Strait. So the demand signal from the world is that this relationship be managed responsibly, and the United States is continuing to do that, and will continue to have those open lines of communication through Ambassador Burns, through the Secretary, and through many others.
So just to be clear, at this point, the conditions do not allow still for the Secretary to visit China.
I don't have a trip to announce, Kylie. I'm not going to offer a moment in time metric or assessment. We continue to work towards rescheduling this trip when conditions allow.
Got it. And then just one more question on U.S.-China relations. Ambassador Burns also said there haven't been substantive talks with China on the issue of fentanyl. I'm wondering about another issue, Americans wrongfully detained in China. Have there been substantive talks between the U.S. and China on that topic in recent months?
I'm not going to specifically read out the conversations that have taken place between U.S. and PRC officials through our bilateral relationship, but what I will say is that Secretary Blinken and others at this department have no higher priority than the safety and security of American citizens abroad, especially those who are wrongfully detained, and it's something that we engage in and raise with countries directly around the world, including the PRC.
Just to follow up on that, is there?
Your colleague has a question.
Yeah, can I
Humaira,
just
go ahead.
ask on Kylie's question?
Yeah.
Is there a proposal from the U.S. side that is on the table with the Chinese about the detained Americans?
I'm just not going to get into specifics of how we engage on releasing wrongfully detained American citizens or the specifics of our diplomatic engagements.
You guys do say that there is a proposal with Russia on Paul Whelan. So I'm just wondering if there is any active talks, active communication with the Chinese, because, I mean, the families were very hopeful about Secretary Blinken's trip, and then that got canceled. We don't know when it's going to be rescheduled. He made some comments about this today. We're just trying to get an understanding of where all of that left the effort, the U.S. effort with China on the topic of detained Americans there. So are there active talks with them?
Let me say a couple of things. First, just because we talk about one case, in the case of Paul Whelan, we've been very clear about there being an offer on the table with the Russian Federation, and the Russian Federation should take it. That does not color or influence or is any indicator of where things stand with other cases. Each wrongfully detained American citizen is of utmost importance to us, and it's something that this administration is pursuing tirelessly, from President Biden, from Secretary Blinken, from Ambassador Carstens, and others. So I don't have a specific update or assessment to offer you. We have raised the case of wrongfully detained Americans as often and as frequently as we can, including in our dialogue with the PRC.
And the final thing is they're actually in town, the campaign with the families, they're in town and doing certain events. And there was a meeting at State yesterday, but why hasn't the Secretary met with them?
The Secretary engages with the families of wrongfully detained American citizens regularly. He does so with wrongfully detained families of citizens who are wrongfully detained all across the world. I don't have specifics to offer on the Secretary's schedule. I know he had the opportunity to briefly connect with some of these families, but it's something that we also do so regularly at regular intervals. This is something that is utmost importance to Secretary Blinken. Go ahead.
Thank you. There was a media report that the U.S. government today asked JP Morgan to process 40 payments related to Russia's grain. Can you confirm that?
That is a question for our colleagues at the Treasury Department. I don't have anything to offer on that. Go ahead, Sam.
You refer to WikiLeaks allegedly damaging U.S. national security. People might remember that WikiLeaks came to prominence because they released the collateral murder video. And what that showed was U.S. military mowing down Reuters reporters, workers in Iraq. Reuters repeatedly asked the U.S. government to disclose such information about those killings, and the U.S. government repeatedly refused to do so. Only then did we know what happened, that the U.S. helicopter gunship mowed down these Reuters workers through the collateral murder video. Are you saying that disclosure of such criminality by the U.S. government impinges U.S. national security?
I was answering a question about Mr. Assange.
Yeah.
I was not offering an assessment on anything else.
But you said that that WikiLeaks damaged U.S. national security. Did it do so by exposing U.S. criminality?
I'm not going to parse or get into specifics. What I will just reiterate again is that Mr. Assange has been charged with criminal conduct for his role in the largest compromise of classified information in our nation's history. That compromise has seriously harmed U.S. national security to the benefit of our adversaries.
But you can't be specific as to
I don't have anything else to add on this.
Just another dimension to this is that, of course, you're going after Assange, the U.S. government, the DOJ, is going after Assange because of the disclosures pertaining to Iraq and Cablegate and so on. This is separate from the whole Russia Gate situation. I don't know if you're familiar with the recent report by James Bamford in The Nation. He's coming out with a book. He's a cybersecurity expert, written a book about the NSA. Piece is entitled Trump's Campaign's Collusion with Israel. Subtitle, While U.S. media fixated on Russian interference in the 2016 election, an Israeli secret agent's campaign to influence the outcome went unreported. What Bamford is alleging is that Israel was actually the conduit to the Trump administration, that their unit 8200.
I'm just going to stop you right there.
No.
I don't think that's true. I also don't have anything else to
I'd
offer
like to
on
know
this.
if the State Department has any assessment on this, because what this means is that everybody was obsessed over Russia's collusion with Trump for years, and what Bamford is reporting through his sources, and he's a very serious NSA reporter. He wrote a book about the NSA, and he's just come out with another book on espionage. Is that Israel was actually the conduit to the Trump administration.
I don't have anything to offer on that other than.
Could I get something in writing?
I don't have anything to offer on that other than in the United States, people can write and publish whatever they want.
I'd love to know
the
if the
benefits
State Department has an
one of the
assessment.
benefits of the
I mean,
First
it should
Amendment.
be an
I'm going to
input
work the
interest.
room now. Your colleagues have still their hands up.
I'd
Nick,
really like to know
you
if
had
the
your
State
hand up
Department
patiently.
assessment on
Go
that.
ahead.
I'd be happy to get an email. Thank you.
Nick, go ahead. You had your hand up patiently.
Senators Grassley and Johnson asking Secretary Blinken to preserve and provide records he may have on Hunter Biden business dealings, including anything sent from his personal emails. I was just wondering if you're familiar with the letter, if the Secretary had received it, and whether or not he's planning to comply with their May 15th deadline.
Thanks for your question, Nick. So we have received this inquiry. We are reviewing it appropriately. What I will say, though, is that I would hesitate to take everything that the Hill says at face value. There has been a clear track record of, in many instances, of transcripts being intentionally taken out of context, being intentionally misrepresented, and so we don't know what exactly the intent or what's going on here. But as I said, we've seen the inquiry and we will review it appropriately. Alex, go ahead.
Back to the South Caucasus. I have actually a question about Georgia, but before that, just to follow up on what you just told my colleague on Armenia, Azerbaijan. Other than the fact that the meeting is ongoing third day in a row, are there any grounds for optimism?
Alex, I'm just not going to. You keep on trying to ask me the same question every day, so I gotta give you credit for your endurance, I suppose. But I'm just not going to get ahead of these talks or these processes. What I will note is that, and this is not something you're disfamiliar with, because it's something that the Secretary has been deeply engaged on, is that we believe that peace between these two countries is possible. We believe that there is not a military solution to this. We believe that direct dialogue through diplomacy is an integral path forward, and that's why we're very pleased to host these two foreign ministers at the Foreign Services Institute to participate and take on these very important discussions. As I said, the Secretary and others across the department have been deeply engaged on this, and we'll look forward to watching the process closely. Camilla,
we have
go
like
ahead.
1 more day to go, or 2 more days to go?
I don't have the exact schedule in front of me, Alex, but we can follow up on
Move
that.
to Georgia if you don't mind. I have,
Okay.
two
And then
actual
we'll come to you,
questions.
Camilla, I promise.
I appreciate that. Georgia has pulled out of a key NATO exercise called Defender 23. Does the U.S. have any reaction to that?
That is a question for Georgia and for NATO. I don't have any assessment to offer from here. I would also let our Pentagon colleagues speak to its impact on any exercises or operations that the United States might be conducting, and I don't have an assessment to offer from here.
Is it going to
Camilla, go
impact
ahead.
U.S.
I'm going to work the
Georgia
room.
relationship?
Alex, you've gotten 3 questions in already.
Thanks for that.
Camilla, go
Super
ahead.
quickly, the former interim president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido, has an event in DC this Friday. I have a feeling you're not going to give anything on this, but any plans for him to meet with State Department officials?
I'm not aware of any plans. Go ahead, Saeed.
Question.
Yeah.
Yesterday, Olga Sardo, the spokesman for the United Nations, said that about 100,000 Sudanese refugees crossed borders into other countries, while close to 330,000 were, dislocated internally. I know that the secretary spoke with his Egyptian counterpart yesterday. This comes amid talks that Egypt is imposing very, very strict entry into its border or through its borders. Was that something that was discussed?
I don't have anything additional to add, Saeed, beyond what was in the readout with the Secretary's call. But what I will say is that we are deeply concerned about the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in Sudan as it relates to, as a result of this violence. That's why we have been so clear and consistent about calling for the need for a ceasefire to continue to be extended, and for that to get to a cessation of hostilities, for the free flow of humanitarian necessities as well. Also, our regional partners have played a really important role in taking on many of these displaced individuals whose country right now is in the midst of a civil war. But I don't have any other assessments to
No
provide.
new figures on
I don't.
whether internally displaced.
I have no other assessments to offer. Okay, final question.
I'm asking this question for one of my colleagues on Ethiopia. So what action what steps United States are taking to mitigate the ongoing civil war?
So the United States has been deeply engaged in the implementation of the cessation of hostilities agreement. We have welcomed the progress of implementing the key elements of the November cessation of hostilities. This is something that the Secretary personally was deeply engaged on. As you know, we traveled to Ethiopia earlier this year. It's something that the Secretary discussed directly with his foreign minister counterpart, as well as Prime Minister Abe as well. All right. Thanks, everybody.